Good afternoon, good morning. Welcome to today's Landscape Conservation and Action webinar series. It's my great honor to welcome you and provide a word of welcome from the Network for Landscape Conservation as we start today. My name is John Peterson, and I'm on staff for the Network for Landscape Conservation. And I just wanted to provide a word of overview on the network before we dive into today's fantastic discussion around using focal area frameworks to prioritize collaborative work. The network launched a decade ago and serves really as a national umbrella group and leading voice for advancing the practice of collaborative landscape conservation across the country. The network really strives to connect people to ideas, innovation, best practices, and to one another. I think that's a key aspect of the network, and I like to think of the network more as a community than an organization, and a community connected by the shared work of collaborative landscape conservation and the shared desire to improve our capacity and our ability to do that work effectively at scale. So one way we like to connect people to ideas and innovation and to one another is through this webinar series, which we launched earlier this year to bring together expertise and share insights and lessons learned from across differing contexts and landscapes across the country. And today we're super excited to bring forward an example from the San Juan-Chama landscape in New Mexico. Another aspect of the network's work, which I'm involved in deeply, is the Catalyst Fund, the Landscape Conservation Catalyst Fund program, which we launched in recognition of a disconnect that we were seeing in the field of collaborative landscape conservation, and that disconnect being that so much of the funding that goes to advancing collaborative or advancing conservation work is project specific. And as we all know, when working at landscape scale and across jurisdictions and across priorities and perspectives, collaboration is so critical to building successful landscape conservation. And that collaboration takes time, it takes energy, it takes an intentional and dedicated investment. And so much of the funding is geared towards the projects that emerge from that long process of collaboration. And so little funding is available for the actual building of the collaborative process. So the Landscape Conservation Catalyst Fund really strives to drive investment in the collaborative process of landscape conservation collaboratives or partnerships. And I'm particularly excited to be able to introduce today's webinar, which emerges from the work of a landscape conservation partnership that we were very fortunate to be able to support and fund through the Landscape Conservation Catalyst Fund. So with that, I wanted to introduce the San Juan-Chama Watershed Partnership and invite today's conversation from Mary Stuever, who is the District Forester for the Chama District of New Mexico Forestry Division. Mary will be joined by Paige Buono, who is the coordinator for the San Juan-Chama Watershed Partnership, as well as Caleb Stotts, who is the executive director for the Chama Peak Land Alliance, which is a core partner and for the partnership. So that I've had the pleasure of working with Mary, Paige, and Caleb for over the last 2 years. And I'm super excited to invite them to share some of the insights and observations and lessons learned that they've pulled from their work in the San Juan-Chama landscape. So with that, I'll turn it over. Mary, I think you're kicking us off, so I'll turn it over to you, and I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. The last piece I would just note is, as participants listen to the conversation today, please feel free to use the chat and the Q&A box to share questions or comments or observations, and we'll aim to hold a few minutes at the end for a little bit of a facilitated Q&A, pulling on your questions that emerge in the chat. So please feel free to share any questions that emerge. And Mary, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you so much for the Catalyst Fund program. If we can go back to the first slide there, Paige, thanks. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about who we are and what we're doing today is we're talking about a specific concept that because of the Catalyst Fund, we were able to spend some extra time really thinking about how to prioritize and how to identify where projects are and what needs to happen on our landscape. So our San Juan-Chama Watershed Partnership is a watershed partnership in the sense that we represent, and you can go to the next slide, please, Paige. We represent the Rio Chama, and that's what's in the light blue outline there. And yet, for those of you who are familiar with water use and water policies in the Western United States, we don't stick in our own watershed, we divert water underneath the Continental Divide. And so we are the San Juan-Chama Watershed Partnership because we take water from 3 of the sub-tributaries of the Navajo River, which goes into the San Juan River, and we direct that water underneath the Continental Divide in a large Chama diversion project, which is part of the Bureau of Reclamation, getting water to the west. And so as a result, we find that we are as interested or even more interested in making sure we have healthy watersheds for the tributaries that are outside of our actual Rio Chama watershed. And we're located right along the Colorado-New Mexico border. So we work in 2 states. Next. So I think everybody has the same problem, and that's that there is a lot of work to do and a limited amount of money to get that done. We're trying to avoid what we call random acts of restoration, those scattered shotgun effect approach, and we're trying to do our best at leveraging our treatments with things like adjacency and finding that we get the biggest bang for the buck when we all purposely put our projects down on the landscape in a way that gives us the most effect. So for example, if we're looking for protecting communities from fires, we may be lining up projects across various jurisdictions to create an effective fuel break where we can stop a fire from going into a community, as an example of that leveraging. But we also know we've got more money than or more projects than we have money. So we also have to figure out how do we get the biggest bang. So we have various authorities and guidance. Most recently, New Mexico Forestry Division updated our forest action plan. And in that we have 10 strategies and we've identified top 500 watersheds. And I have to step back a point to say that in New Mexico, we often joke about, considering the national forest to be an inholding within the state, but the state of New Mexico is very serious about our water. And if we can get all of the agencies, all of the different owners to work together, then we have a better chance of protecting that. And so we all work together. We have a large forest and watershed coordinating group, and this represents anyone and everyone. And then that group identified these 10 strategies, and that group has also had some input into identifying the 10 priority landscapes, which were identified as a part of the shared stewardship program, where we're working with the U.S. Forest Service and the state forestry organization to help all of our partners support the Forest Service in the work that they're doing on national forest lands. We also look at national forest plans. We have soil and water conservation districts, which each have their plans. And there's plenty of other state plans that we try to align with, plans for water, wildlife, soil, and recreation. So the other key thing that we're trying to do is leverage the different grant opportunities that are out there. So for example, currently in this area, we're working on a very large regional conservation partnership program, We hope to be able to continue to apply for that program. And that program has worked primarily on private lands, but also under applications from cooperators can work on federal lands. We're anticipating that our area will be receiving a collaborative forest landscape restoration program grant, which will go for 10 years. And this is a really huge grant program. It involves 4 national forests and it goes across the state line. We also have a very big project in New Mexico called the Rio Grande Water Fund, which is headed up by the Nature Conservancy, but brings funding from all kinds of sources, including private funding and corporate funding. And then, of course, all of us have our regular programmatic funding. So we felt that we needed to develop a way of looking at the landscape in order to make the best decisions about where we put the money. So we know we have a lot of money that we're handling and that's coming in, but we also know that our issues are much larger than the money that's coming to us. So we needed to come up with an integrated approach. And we felt that if we did that together as a stakeholder group, we would build those relationships that we needed. So our first thought wasn't so much to prioritize and start the fist fights right away, but to generate that catalog of projects that are needed. And then as we generate that catalog together, we can develop the shared sense of priority and projects. So a focal area, and we'll go into this a little bit more, it provides a mid-scale view to assessing what our issues and needs are. And it allows for us to really drill down to local knowledge. So someone who might not be interested in what's happening on the other side of the mountain, they can come to a focal area gathering to provide their input. And using the focal areas has helped us postpone this prioritization request that we're constantly getting while we're building the stakeholder knowledge, and it makes it easier for us as a group of informed stakeholders to make those priority decisions. It also helps us collect and share stories. It creates a synergy, and we're able to plan and prioritize projects and look for the right funding for the right project. Next page. Thanks. So in terms of understanding the focal area, it might be easy to think about this as when you pick up a book. You know, the book is perhaps one piece of it, and then a chapter, and then a page, and then a sentence. Next. We think of our priority landscapes as our books. Our focal areas are like the chapters. And then many of you are already familiar with projects. It's a term used by the Forest Service when they put a large landscape together or a timber cell. It groups a bunch of treatments and activities. And then finally, the treatments and activities. So if we want to look at New Mexico recently identified these 10 priority landscapes for the next 10 years as part of our work on the 2020 Forest Action Plan. And so this is what our 10 priority landscapes currently look like in the hot pink. And our focal areas, this is an example of some of our focal areas that we've identified in the San Juan-Chama Watershed Partnership laid on top of that priority landscape. And then projects would be things like Forest Service NEPA planning unit or a timber cell unit, or it might be a wildland urban interface area that's around a particular community, or possibly it's an impaired watershed that is falling under the 319 program. So we have a bunch of big picture projects. Treatments are each individual activity. It could be an archaeological survey, or it could be a thinning project, or it might be a stream restoration willow planting or something like that. And those are the ones that get mapped in polygons on the landscape. And you can see here's one that's showing maybe over 25 treatments. And we've done a lot of work to try to help put these treatments together on the landscape in order to get the biggest bang for our treatment money. So as we've been identifying focal areas, we found that we have kind of two directions for working on this. The first attempt that we did was an area-wide approach where we built a patchwork out of our high priority watersheds. And then we were able to lump together in that patchwork things that had similar values and issues. And so one area might have a wild and scenic river, and that may be a driving force for it. Another area may be very high spruce fir ecosystems where water is the driving force. And another might have a lot of communities around it where wildland urban interface becomes a driving force. But by separating our landscape out into this patchwork, it gives us a better understanding of where we have our different kinds of issues. Another approach to this that a lot of our partners are using and that we're spreading out to use in other parts of our CFLRP is where we just hone in on priority projects for those areas only and develop, somewhere between 1 to 3 focal areas within a larger areas. And so you're not looking at the whole landscape, you're just looking at the place that's important to you. And to give you an idea of when we went through this process, we went to our New Mexico Forest Action Plan because we had recently done a lot of work, GIS work and modeling work. And so using the HUC 12 watersheds, we were able to identify a lot of key important things. Like this is showing our risk to biodiversity. And we also, next slide. We also did a risk to wildfire, and in doing that risk, we used a raster type modeling to look at the threat of wildfire burn severity. And that also helped us look at modeling post-fire effects. We looked at irrigators and where was it important for our farmers who depend on irrigation water, what watersheds were key and important to them on that. Next. Here are some of our post-fire flood production modeling, where now we know that we've got these particular focal areas where it's real important that we work, because if we have that large fire there, we may have some real severe threats to the water conveyance systems that we have. And then we also looked at the threat of post-fire erosion. And so that brings its own set of problems. So the big message here was if we can get to these areas before they burn, we have a much better chance of saving lots and lots of dollars down the road. So we also look at other prioritization efforts that are going on, especially because the CFLRP coming on board is to money to be used on Forest Service lands. We're quite interested in where the 5-year priorities for the Forest Service are on the Carson and the Santa Fe National Forest, as well as on the Rio Grande and San Juan National Forest. They're just not shown on the map there. So when we have identified the polygons, we build a spreadsheet. And in the spreadsheet, we capture all kinds of information about that particular focal area. What are the HUC 12 watersheds that make it up? What's the description of it? What are the key things that we think are important? Who's working in the area? What kind of work has been done in the past? What do we think needs to be done? So all these things we're capturing on a spreadsheet. And then once we have that spreadsheet developed, we start developing pages for each particular focal area of what are the treatments that are happening. And this one is color-coded by 3 different projects. And so the projects still come in as an important landscape feature, and we can lump the projects under them. And that we'll be able to track what's been completed, what's in progress, what's being planned. All right, well, thank you guys.
Thanks so much. And Mary, sorry for the spastic, my mouse is being very sensitive. So sorry for the back and forth on some of the slides. As Mary mentioned, the San Juan-Chama Watershed Partnership is sort of nested in this larger priority area identified by the state and also part of what we call the 232. It's the 2 watersheds, 3 rivers, 2 states cohesive strategy partnership, which is a mouthful. So we refer to it as the 232. And the 232 really sort of formed as an umbrella organization for some of these place-based collaboratives, like the San Juan-Chama Watershed Partnership back in 2016. And the goal was to help, bring those local place-based perspectives and knowledge and planning efforts to this larger landscape where we need to see the scale of work that we need to see done. And so this is a map of the 232 prior to the Rio-Chama CFLRP. So the 232 is in red, and that San Juan-Chama is the nested pink within it. So as you can see, the San Juan-Chama is a significant portion of the landscape. We have another place-based collaborative that operates on the Colorado side of the border, kind of west of the San Juan-Chama here on the San Juan National Forest. So in 2019, when we applied for the Rio-Chama CFLRP, we extended the boundaries of the 232 south to include the Santa Fe National Forest. So this kind of purple dotted line. So what you're seeing here is the Rio-Chama CFLRP nested within that 232, or the extension of it. And what this sort of did, as Mary mentioned, was call for even more increased coordination and planning. We're working with 4 national forests, 2 states, BLM, and multiple tribes within this landscape. And so as the San Juan-Chama was learning and developing and innovating this process, we recognized it as a huge opportunity to sort of expand it across the partnership and to help to use it to give us a unified language to use across that 5 million acre geography. So as I mentioned, we sort of divided that geography into 4, what we called kind of more bite-sized chunks, to both recognize places where there were already place-based collaboratives. So in region 1 and in region 3, which is the San Juan-Chama, there was already, obviously a ton of work being done, like Mary talked about. In our region 2 and region 4, there are partners working and planning processes in place, but there wasn't that local collaborative already invested in kind of trying to help identify these focal areas or another kind of prioritization process. And so we kind of broke the landscape apart into these 4 sections. 1 and 3, as Mary mentioned, are sort of building on their existing efforts to integrate their knowledge into this focal area framework. And then in subregion 2 and 4, we kind of started from scratch. And so I wanted to give the example of subregion 2, where the group really met for the first time a couple weeks ago. And they are just at the sort of information gathering stage. So where Mary mentioned with the San Juan-Chama partnership, that they built a lot on the FAP, the New Mexico Forest Action Plan data. This group is mostly on the Colorado side of the border. They're integrating some of the Colorado State Forest Action Plan data, but they've also looked at a number of other layers to help inform, where the priorities are, where partners are already working, where we can't work, like wilderness areas and roadless areas, and then where some planning has already taken place in the form of what we call pods, potential operational delineations for wildfire management. They are meeting again this Friday to kind of take and digest all of that information and draft their first rough polygons of those focal areas. And as Mary suggested, from there, they'll move to that spreadsheet. And so we just wanted to share this example to kind of demonstrate how the framework that the San Juan-Chama partnership developed is already being adopted and integrated at a larger scale within this landscape. And there are other partnerships, the Taos Valley Watershed Coalition, which is a little bit to the southeast of us, for example, is also taking this as a model and integrating it into their planning efforts. And then I think Caleb's going to get in the weeds on how he, as one of our partners, is using this.
Okay.
So Caleb, I'll stop sharing.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Paige. And I'm going to screen share here, so bear with me for just 1 minute while I bring up my presentation. Okie doke. Can folks see this okay?
Yep, we've got you, Caleb.
Okay, great. So my name is Caleb Stotts. I am the executive director of a nonprofit organization called the Chama Peak Land Alliance. We're a small 501c3. We do a lot of collaboration and working with partners in this little region here in northern New Mexico, southern Colorado, but our primary focus is working on private lands. So we're a landowner-driven organization made up of folks who are pretty committed to conservation and trying to practice and promote best conservation practices. So I'm going to talk about how we've used this framework in one particular area. So I'm going to back up just a little bit and give a little more of an overview of some of the work that we do and that others do in this area. And this map that you saw earlier of the San Juan-Chama Watershed Partnership is a very important area in terms of ecological services. And so there's a lot of water that comes out of the mountains and through the rivers here in this area. So from this area that you're looking on at this map, there's snowfall that happens, gets captured in diversions, goes through kind of a conveyance system through, dams and rivers, and ends up in a couple of pretty important cities. So this area produces and delivers about 80% of Albuquerque's municipal water and about 50% of Santa Fe's municipal water. This is the main source of water for a lot of tribal nations and pueblos, small municipalities, agricultural producers. And I think the importance of this region for providing water is one of the main reasons why the San Juan-Chama Watershed Partnership exists. It's just a really important area. So what is the threat in this area? So one of the most imminent threats in this area is unnaturally dense forest conditions. And so we've seen this all over the West, all over the Southwest, where these dense forest conditions result in severe wildfire, especially in this kind of era of climate change. And then we see these post-fire flooding events and erosion events. And so it's in a lot of cases in terms of, riparian systems and water, it's not necessarily the direct fire event that really messes up these water systems. It's the post-fire flooding. And so this picture that I have here, I'm going to try to show a little video of this event. You might have heard about this in the news. This occurred about 3 or 4 weeks ago in Flagstaff. And this area up in the mountains had burned about 2 years ago. And there was a big rainfall event, and it resulted in this kind of a flash flood event. And what you're going to see in this video and what you can see in this picture is a lot of debris. You have a lot of silt, you have rocks, you got, logs, you got sticks, a bunch of gunk. And, when it comes to really important watersheds and water supply, this can create huge problems. So I'm going to try this video and hopefully it works. So this is a flash flood event. You can see it's like the living blob. You got rocks in there, you got sticks, just all kinds of nasty stuff, and it's coming quick and it builds up quick. And so if you're thinking in terms of, kind of this natural infrastructure, you have these watersheds that store water and they release water. You can see that these severe fires really impair the ability of that watershed to perform their sort of natural watershed function. Yeah, I don't know if you saw, it was like 3 or 4 weeks ago, there was a Prius floating down the street in Flagstaff that kind of caught some national news. That was the same event there. Okay, so how are we addressing this threat? A lot of it is forestry practices. And so what we're trying to do here is kind of take multiple objectives. Number one, in a lot of cases, is just wildfire mitigation. We want to reduce the risk of that crown fire moving through canopies. We don't want to turn really nice pieces of land into burned matchsticks. So that motivates a lot of people. A lot of these forests did evolve with fire. And so we try to understand the forest type and promote ecological function and resilience, and wildlife, habitat, aesthetics. All of these things are really important. Okay, so look at this, how do we use these focal areas? So we look at this landscape, we see all these focal areas. This is a big landscape. And so, this whole big polygon, the red thing is about 5 million acres. the San Juan-Chama Watershed Partnership is about, I think, 2 or 2.5 million acres. For us, we're a small nonprofit. We have one employee, myself. We're not going to focus on this entire landscape. So we really need to kind of prioritize our areas. And so this is a way that it's an easy way to do that. We can kind of define our little priority areas. And so let's look at one of these areas. So this is the Upper Chama focal area. I think it's maybe 150, 200,000 acres or so. One of the main reasons why I think this focal area framework is nice for myself and hopefully for other nonprofits is that it can kind of help to combine all that information that Mary was talking about. And so one of the ways that I try to use this is, for grant, applying for grant funding. And so writing proposals. And so some things that are often asked in a grant proposal are, they want you to describe the importance of the area. They want you to describe values at risk. They want to show why a specific treatment area has been prioritized. And they want to know how this work will leverage other efforts, who is working in the area and what are they doing. And so I'm going to kind of walk through some examples of this area and how we're using this. And a lot of the way that I'm using it is in combination with this forest action plan that Mary was talking about. So as I work, as I look at different grants, as I look, let's say if I wanted to describe the importance of this area, this map kind of helps to show that right here. There's 10 sovereign nations, pueblos that are served by watersheds in this Upper Chama focal area. And this is the state of New Mexico. And you can see our little focal area up top here. So it helps to illustrate these really important features of this area. So there are Spanish land grants in New Mexico, and this area, you can see it kind of falls in a kind of a priority area if you wanted to focus on watersheds that served historic Spanish land grants. This is a layer from the Forest Action Plan that shows watersheds of crucial importance for large public water utilities in New Mexico. And you can see how this map and this focal area kind of helps us to make that claim that this is a really important area for water utilities. Okay, so if we want to describe values at risk, these are the shared stewardship, HUC 12 watersheds that Mary was talking about. This is just kind of zoomed in to a finer scale. So this shows in this Upper Chama area, let's say I wanted to apply for a grant relating to risk to communities. So maybe a WUI grant or something. Maybe I could use this information to help show that this is a priority area in terms of state priorities or risk to water. Okay, why is a certain area prioritized for treatment? Okay, here's some more information from the Forest Action Plan. The map on the left shows that threat of wildfire burn severity. These are similar things that Mary showed, but just zoomed in to a finer scale. And then the map on the right is the post-fire flood protection index. I hope you all like maps as much as I do. I like maps, so hopefully they're not too boring, but they're really useful for me. Here's another map. This shows acequias and domestic water sources. And so in New Mexico, these acequias are really important to local communities. They're basically irrigation ditches that folks use for growing food and other crops. And so if we wanted to apply for a grant to protect these acequias or these domestic water sources, we could use this information to help prioritize areas. There's a big push, I think, right now for working across boundaries. And so one of the things we like to do in these partnerships is explore opportunities to work across fence boundaries, private and state and federal and all that stuff. This here, what I'm showing are in that little pink color is mixed conifer forest types on operable ground that's under 35% slope, that are on private land and that are directly adjacent to Forest Service priority areas in New Mexico. And so if we wanted to apply for a grant that really specified their working across boundaries, we could use this information for that purpose. And then I think that kind of the heart of a lot of this work is all this metadata. And so it's really important. Probably a lot of you on this call have applied for grants, and they ask you, how will this leverage other efforts in your region? Who is working there? What are they doing? What has been done in the past? All that kind of stuff. And so we're creating a framework where we're collecting that information, and it's already useful as we're working to bring funding into the region. And so that, I think, covers my 10 minutes or so. And Mary, I'll kick it over back to you. I'll stop sharing my screen here.
And Paige, okay, so we did have a question in the chat about who oversees the New Mexico Stewardship Portal. And I just wanted to tell you guys that you're super lucky to be looking at these images today. The New Mexico Stewardship Portal hasn't gone live yet. It's in process of being built. And we're hoping that it will be a live feature for all of our stakeholders to be using by October this year. So we're working with the contractor on putting this thing together. And one of the things that's pretty exciting is that as we presented to our stakeholder group for building this portal, this concept of focal areas, it was well received, and people saw the need for being able to go not just from the priority area to the project level, but from the priority level to the focal area to the project level. And if we can do the next slide, here's looking at two of our priority landscapes, and then showing some of these, and this is one of the patchwork examples of focal areas laid on top of that. And the neat thing about the Shared Stewardship Portal is it will make available to people even without ArcGIS and GIS opportunities, the ability to really understand and look at things. So for example, if we look down at the lower right-hand side, you'll notice that our focal areas don't exactly match up to the CFLRP area. And if we go to the next slide, we're looking now at a slide of the top 500 watersheds. And this slide is color coded. The greens mean that all of the factors we looked at, the wildfire risk to biodiversity and water supply and communities, that those watersheds hit those. But then the other colors represent, if it's a primary color like yellow, it represents that it was a watershed that was important to, I think, biodiversity. And if it was a blue area, it was important to water. And if it was a red area, it's important to wildfire. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that that area that wasn't covered in the CFLRP is one that was a focus for both biodiversity and for wildfire, but not necessarily for water. And so it just gives us a deeper understanding to, well, why did they put this line here, and why is that line there, and what's going on? And so you can tell by our focal areas on top of this watershed layer of important watersheds that that's exactly the layer we use to determine what would be used in our patchwork quilt of our focal areas. Was we did not spend time developing information about areas that were not one of the top 500 watersheds identified in the State Forest Action Plan. So that just gives you a little example of that. And yeah, we'll end here and turn it back to Jonathan.
Thanks so much, you guys. Really appreciated the conversation, and thank you so much for joining today to share all of this information and help facilitate this conversation. I think it just an observation as we transition to questions and answers, and folks, by all means, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A box to chime in with any questions you want to make sure Mary, Paige, and Caleb pick up. But one of the things I found so compelling about your presentation today was the ability to work across scales and scale up and down, and Caleb's perspective of coming to it from a slightly smaller conservation organization with a single staff and being able to really accelerate and direct his work with much greater impact and effectiveness versus scaling up and thinking across the state level is super powerful. So thanks so much for bringing this forward. Let me just take a moment to see if we had some questions coming in. We have a question here about actively incorporating and involving underserved communities and landowners into the process. And I'm just curious to hear any reflections from you all. It sounds like a lot of the information is coming from existing priorities and plans from others, but any comments on that theme or the ability to have this a living document that updates and incorporates new information?
Yeah, that's really critical here in northern New Mexico. We have Paige mentioned tribes and the land grants, but we have acequia organizations. We have the Soil and Water Conservation District itself often has representatives from the land grants and from the acequias. So one of our first steps when we came up with this focal area concept before we really had things firmed up was to go directly to the Soil and Water Conservation District. You know, it was important to us to be able to get that feedback and to get that knowledge. I think up here, before there were vehicles, you know, we had people living up here. And so communities that are 4 miles apart today with a road were quite separated, and they have quite a bit of community independence, and they see themselves differently from the community 4 miles down the road. And so it's incredibly important that we aren't lumpers in the sense of saying this is all one big thing, but that we really recognize how important those individual ties are to the land and to the community and to what's going on.
I would just build on that and say that we, is it echoing for you all? It's just echoing for me. Okay. We are, to Mary's point, you know, we sat down with a number of people and to the point in the question that about kind of having them remain flexible. We see these, you know, as a solid framework, and we want to the extent possible to continue sort of building upon it, but these aren't concrete, you know, and the goal is very much to keep them adjustable. And we've, you know, reached out to a number of the Pueblos, and they're integrating at least, you know, thinking about a couple of them, TFPA identified landscapes where they've already got authority and plans to work. So they're integrating that feedback. And I think to the question of like, if we're taking steps, yes, definitely. And I think it's not done. I think we still intend to do a lot more work to invite that information.
Great, thanks so much. I'm going to sort of weave together a couple of questions that I see coming in around the recognition that when working at scale across landscapes, you often get conflicting goals and priorities within a landscape. And you know, how do you build? How is this an effective tool, or how do you think about building consensus across those conflicts or across diverse stakeholders when you're thinking at the various scales of focal areas, priorities, treatments, et cetera?
Yeah, I think one really helpful thing for me is being able to use pretty empirical data. And so this forest action plan, you know, there's a lot of work that went into it. You know, the state, I think, did a great job. The Nature Conservancy was heavily involved in working on the plan with the state. It was a collaborative process, and I think it was really good. And there's actually a lot more data that came out of it than just what we showed. And so I feel like it's just something, like it's a good product that we can use. And so I think that's one of the real valuable things for me is we can just we can have good data to work with, because we really need good data to inform our decision makings. But then it's also really important just to tie in the local knowledge, and that's one thing I really like about this framework that we came up with, is it's kind of a combination way of being able to use that, real technical data that, a lot of science folks came up with, and being able to use on the ground knowledge that, Mary has been working on the ground there for, I don't know how long, for a long time. And, we're able to incorporate, hear from other stakeholders who have been working in the area for a long time, and hear in their own words about what's important to them. And so I think the nice thing about the framework is that we can kind of combine those values. And of course, people do have different values. So, it doesn't always line up, but we're doing what we can.
I do think it also helps us have the right conversations at the right scale. So, sometimes we find that groups with diverging interests will sort of come and want to hash that out at this really large scale, where it's really hard to even sort of ground the conversation. And I think having these focal areas helps us have really specific conversations that can be sort of more proactive, and it's easier to source perspectives. So people, it's easier to ground the conversation in real people and real examples. And to Caleb's point, it doesn't mean that it always results in consensus, but I think between the science and the right scale of conversation, it's a more grounded conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Caleb and Paige. It looks like we
lost Mary.
Hopefully,
she usually comes right back.
I think she's joining from rural New Mexico, so hopefully the internet connectivity cooperates with her. And folks, keep the questions coming. Some really wonderful questions popping up in the chat. The next one I wanted to pick up, and I recognize you're sort of still in the process of building the framework and putting it into action, but one benefit of such a framework, I think, is the ability to think about tracking progress and success over time too. So can you speak a little bit to that notion of using the framework not only to prioritize action, but also to be able to capture and track success and sort of roll that success up from various scales into looking at impact that's being achieved over the broader, larger landscape?
Yeah, I can at least speak from that sort of broader 232 umbrella partnership, and how we've talked about using essentially the spreadsheet as an annual planning and reflection document. So we've talked about, essentially having our partners working in those different subregions come each fall with their current list of projects, and that, we're using that as an opportunity for discussion around barriers. So are there funding gaps? Are there survey gaps? Do we need our key in a place that we don't have it yet? And then, kind of on an annual basis, reflecting back on that spreadsheet to see, did we accomplish the projects that we set out to? If not, why? What additional funds did we bring in through that process? And so we're developing, at least at that larger scale, and that will obviously be informed by an impact to the San Juan-Chama, is a monitoring framework for within that big landscape, and all of these metrics associated with each of the projects kind of tie in with that. I don't know if that. Mary will probably have a good answer to that one too, or a better answer.
I am back. I'm sorry I got bumped off.
Welcome back, Mary. I just sort of picked up a question that we were seeing in the chat around, thinking of this, recognizing that you're just getting this started and sort of putting it in place, and a lot of the presentation today focused on its utility as a way to prioritize projects going forward. But on the flip side, there's a lot of utility too in thinking of it as a way to track progress and success and impact on the landscape. And so I was just putting the question out, you know, how to think about using the framework in that sense, and how do you measure success and impact, and sort of roll up across the scales, roll up the collective impact and success that's happening at the landscape scale into that broader landscape perspective too.
Yeah, and I kind of feel often that our success is being enveloped by a lot of the work that's happening on a statewide basis, with the state stewardship portal as being a location that will allow us to track treatments and to see what's going on, and to see what's going on in maybe fields that we're not necessarily working in as much, and things like that. So I think we have shown the through the work that we did with Catalyst and with this particular watershed project, we showed what could be done, and I think that has been embraced, and it's now trying to be expanded to a statewide type of format to be able to pull that off. So we may not have a functional spreadsheet in a few years because we're able to put the things on the portal, but our spreadsheet is a whole lot more robust in terms of detailed information. So I suspect we'll always keep a spreadsheet and keep gathering information and stuff, because it's more than what we're setting the portal up to be able to handle.
And sort of a follow-up question there too is, in thinking about the spreadsheet and working across jurisdictions and across partners, have you guys identified common metrics to help track progress across different partners and projects? Any observations or reflections on that aspect?
Paige, do you want to talk some about where we're going with monitoring with the 232 and the CFLRP?
Yeah, I just kind of touched on that before, but basically we're in the process right now of developing a comprehensive monitoring strategy for across that full 5 million acre geography. And it's in coordination with our Forest Service partners, because a significant amount of the funding coming in through CFLRP is for work on Forest Service lands. But what we've talked about, I think, is a combination of economic, ecological, and social factors. So looking at, both acres treated, miles of stream restored, metrics like that, as well as, local businesses supported, number of jobs created around some of the restoration opportunities, and, community engagement, protection through wildfire mitigation. I don't know, I'm not part of that working group, so I don't know exactly where the conversation stands right now. But yes, we are looking at a comprehensive and uniform strategy. Great,
thanks so much, Paige. All right, I'll pick up one more question, and apologies if your question hasn't been addressed, and we're capturing all the questions, and we'll have those to follow up after. And but anyway, Mary, I'm reflecting back to one of your opening slides and your reflection or observation that the need far exceeds the amount of funding that you have available. But as you think about the work that you guys have done through setting up this framework, how do you see that impacting your ability to secure additional funding moving forward, or any observations or thoughts around what sort of putting this foundation in place means going forward as you continue to wrestle with the pressing needs that you're facing at the landscape level?
Yeah, and thanks for the question, because I think that part of there's not enough money is that we haven't done a good enough job articulating how much we truly need. And there is a sticker shock kind of thing that goes on as well. And so we've been saying, you know, for over a decade, that we need to increase the pace and the scale of the work that's being done on the landscape in order to have healthy, resilient forest ecosystems and to be able to turn the tide on this relatively new, the last couple of decades, mega fire concept. And so should we, through these kinds of processes, I think it's really helping us identify where the projects are, how much needs to be done, and to articulate to funders such as the Rio Grande Water Fund and the congressional delegation and our state legislature, what is really truly the cost of being able to have a West or a New Mexico in this case that doesn't burn in big mega fires, and then can we afford it, and how do we afford it? And I think we're getting there, and I think we are each year seeing increases in that pace and scale. But in the New Mexico Forest Action Plan, you know, we tried to put our fingers on what is the number that we need, and it looked like we needed to be doing 10 times as much each year as what we've been doing in the last year.
I think it also, just having that catalog of projects makes us way readier to respond to funders. So, you know, a lot of times a funding request comes in and we have low capacity organizations like Caleb, you know, it's like anytime a funding request comes in, it's totally on him to make that case. And I think having the catalog of projects, the case already made, the resources there, I think it does help us jump on the opportunities to secure funding much more efficiently.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mary and Paige. Well, looking at the time, I think we'll wrap there. And Mary, Paige, Caleb, thank you so much for joining today. It's been a real pleasure to have you guys here and to be able to be in conversation with you all, as it always is. So thank you to all of you. Thanks so much for everyone else that joined the conversation too. It's so wonderful to have you in conversation with us, and we look forward to staying in touch and staying in conversation as we collectively wrestle with questions around what it means to pursue conservation at scale across our landscapes. As I noted at the top of the call, this was a webinar in the network's ongoing Landscape Conservation in Action webinar series, and we've had intentionally a slow schedule over the course of the summer as we all are navigating the summer months and a lot of the time out of the office, hopefully that we all need to recharge and restore ourselves. But I'm very much looking forward to ramping up the series again in the fall, and stay tuned as we get ready to announce upcoming webinars in the series. So with that, thanks so much again to Mary, Paige, Caleb. Thanks so much for joining today, and we look forward to talking to you all soon. Thank you.